Chapter 63, 2020. There had been enough time to temper the havoc that would quickly devastate the world. With the 2020 New Year party balloons still half inflated, events continued to unfold thousands of miles away, but the warnings came and went. Within weeks, it was part of the daily news cycle. Pictures from Wuhan showed just how forceful the authoritarian Chinese officials were in dealing with the dissenting minorities to Beijing's strict controls on movement. Even the images of residents being dragged into military vehicles disguised with stick-on medical signs were not enough to wake up Boris, the PM, still riding the self-congratulatory wave of Brexit and the affirmation that he was temporarily the political king of the Union. By early February, things were increasingly serious at home. With Italy entering the tightest peacetime controls of public movement Europe had ever known, it was only a matter of time before the rest of Europe followed. Despite a leadership that had won a mandate based on tougher border controls, Britain was surprisingly lax. Screening at airports and ports wasn't happening, and there was no process in place or even the necessary equipment to separate the potential carriers arriving at the numerous entry points into the Union. And when the inevitable first case was reported, it was clear things were getting serious and were quickly about to get a lot worse. Meanwhile, the government flippantly advised the public to sing Happy Birthday whilst washing their hands. Not really the effective governing the British people deserved from their government. It wasn't the strong leadership they thought they were voting for just a few months before. Like most rational members of planet Earth, Isla was frightened. This could potentially turn into a worse disaster than 9/11. The inevitability of its potential scale was obvious. The virus, like every virus before it, knew no borders. But aside from the public health issues, Isla had more pressing concerns. If the country was going into lockdown, being stuck with the man she was living with was something she knew she would not be able to get through. In normal times, without an order to stay together indoors, things were already volatile. There had been good times, but they were only memorable for their rarity. There was now no romance or affection, and Isla had given up on her plan to settle down and have a family of her own. The thought of dying alone, whether in 4 months, 4 years, or 40 years' time, was enough to want something more than nothing. She had concluded that Jakob was a thoroughly unpleasant man, but the fear of being alone had forced her down a path that found her living with this somebody even if he treated her badly. As she walked by the canal that snaked around the old Olympic site in East London, her preoccupation was with herself. What state must she be in to see this relationship as a better choice than being alone? Isla was filled with self-loathing, continuing with her struggle to find any value in herself. She recalled her 40th birthday 2 years earlier. Her few remaining friends, who were largely happily partnered up and content as they skulked towards middle age, turned what should have been an old-school party into a piss-poor evening. They were at a stage in life where they had to plan to get a night out without kids so much that half the people who turned up only came to spend the evening liberating themselves from the shackles of parenthood. By 9, many of them were so far gone they'd started to leave for home, and the other half was so unused to socialising outside of the confines of their middle-class, tapenade darling dining tables they'd forgotten how to have fun. The stilted, boring conversations about how Talia was doing in Year 4 turned the event into a social disaster. In her life, the biggest challenge was not the availability of organic aubergines or the cleaner either going off sick or going home to Argentina. With her birthday party having prematurely disintegrated, Isla ended up going home with the pub bouncer many hours after the majority of her friends had disappeared. She'd stopped seeing her beauty and the mirror was her enemy. The joy that freedom and self-respect brought continued to elude her. She was now older, heavier, lonely, and very unhappy, the sort of feelings that make you jump at the first thing presenting itself. And when Jakob took her for breakfast at a cafe in Hackney the next morning, he enthusiastically talked about his recent diving holiday. Maybe next time they could go together. It felt like this could be the one to make the pain go away. The first time he hit her, Isla convinced herself it was her fault. She'd had a drink and he accelerated by something considerably less legal. He explained to her why it was her fault. She knew what she did wrong and it wouldn't happen again, so she stayed with him, moving into his dingy one-bedroom flat soon after their first night together. But the second time, Isla knew that it wasn't her fault. Jakob was an arsehole with a temper, and when he couldn't unleash his temper at work, he took it out on whoever was closest. She knew next to nothing about him. He had no friends unconnected to work. Any attempts to connect with him about how he'd ended up in East London, far away from his hometown in Lithuania, yielded nothing. He never discussed it, never went back home, and sure as hell never suggested they visit together. In fact, they'd never been anywhere together. There had never been further mention of a diving holiday, and when Isla suggested they go away for a weekend in the New Forest, he reluctantly agreed but pulled out via a text message the day before. He had to work. There was no apology or regret. That was the end of it. No discussion, no explanation. The Christmas that had recently passed had been joyless, and her regular trips back to visit her loving parents in Hemel were now incredibly infrequent. She knew her lack of positivity was something her parents could see straight away. She hated worrying them. She also hated being questioned on her choices she couldn't justify to rational, loving people such as her folks. Remote from her family and increasingly cut off from her friends who had outgrown her, Isla's attempts to make her life better continued to backfire. She felt worse for trying. Her last flight out of New York in 2001, where she looked out over the devastation in the south of Manhattan Island, haunted her. She regretted her immediate decision to stop flying and pursue a different career, and the failure of her love life at that time underpinned the many failed relationships since. Nothing came close to the feeling she had held for Steve nearly 19 years ago. After nearly 2 years with him, Isla had never shared a spiritual moment with Jacob. In that first evening with Steve, she'd established a benchmark to compare all future moments against, and inevitably they had all failed to meet that mark. As the never-ending news cycle rolled, it was confirmed on a minute-by-minute basis that the world had gone mad. The shops were being cleared of pasta and toilet rolls, with anything in a tin quickly becoming a new form of currency. The government briefed the nation daily at 5 p.m. Working from home was the new norm for anybody lucky enough to have a job. Isla and her colleagues were being furloughed. Pubs and clubs were closing. Jacob was going to be out of work. If she didn't get out, the prospect of being confined with a monster loomed. He was a threat to her, and she would be another nameless statistic on a domestic casualty list. Although it was a long time since she had left home, the option of moving back to Hemel Hempstead was her best bet. She'd have to tell her parents the truth about her relationship to get through this, and it would break their hearts. But as the schools started closing, Isla knew she was running out of time to make her escape from the Hackney hell before public transport shut down. If she didn't leave now, she would be trapped. She downed a second glass of vodka. That would be enough to find the courage she needed to ring her parents' house, but it rang out. They're never out this time of evening. She tried her mum's mobile, but there was no answer. Only one number left to dial, the number she wanted to dial least, her dad's.